Every economic crisis in America follows the same predictable pattern. Government intervention creates distortions. Markets struggle to correct them. Politicians blame market failure and demand more intervention. This cycle repeats because modern economics has abandoned the one scientific foundation that makes genuine understanding possible, the logic of human action itself. When I developed praxeology in Vienna decades ago, I discovered that economics isn't about statistics or mathematical models, it's about the universal laws that govern how humans choose and act. These laws are as certain as geometry, yet American policymakers ignore them completely. Today, as inflation destroys savings and regulations strangle entrepreneurship, understanding the science of human action isn't just academic, it's essential for preserving American prosperity. Let me show you why this logical method revolutionizes everything we thought we knew about economics, and why it's the only foundation for genuine economic science. Chapter 1: The Foundation: Why Human Action is the Starting Point of All Economic Science. Economics became a genuine science the moment I recognized that all economic phenomena stem from a single, undeniable fact: humans act purposefully. This isn't a theory requiring empirical validation, it's a logical axiom that cannot be denied without contradiction. When someone argues against the purposefulness of human action, they engage in purposeful action to make their argument, thus proving the very principle they attempt to refute. This axiom of purposeful action forms the bedrock of what I call praxeology, the logic of human action. Unlike physics or chemistry, which study the behavior of inanimate objects, economics studies conscious beings who choose between alternatives to achieve preferred outcomes. This fundamental difference requires an entirely different methodology. Consider what happens when you decide to buy coffee instead of tea. You're not responding to mathematical equations or statistical probabilities, you're making a value judgment based on your subjective preferences at that moment. You believe the coffee will better satisfy your wants than the tea, given your current circumstances. This simple decision reveals the core principles that govern all economic activity: subjective valuation, opportunity cost, marginal utility, and time preference. American economists have tragically abandoned this logical foundation, instead attempting to study human behavior as if people were billiard balls responding mechanically to external forces. They collect vast amounts of data, construct elaborate mathematical models, and then wonder why their predictions consistently fail. They miss the fundamental truth that economic laws are logical laws, derived deductively from the axiom of purposeful action, not empirical generalizations that might change with different circumstances. When the Federal Reserve claims to stimulate the economy through monetary expansion, they ignore the praxeological reality that artificial credit expansion distorts the natural interest rate structure, misleading entrepreneurs about genuine saving patterns and creating unsustainable investment booms. No amount of econometric modeling can override this logical necessity. It's built into the very nature of human action under the constraints of scarcity. The beauty of praxeological method lies in its certainty. While physicists must constantly revise their theories based on new experimental evidence, the laws of human action remain constant because they're derived from the unchanging logical structure of purposeful behavior. This gives us the foundation for economic science that's both rigorous and practical. Chapter 2: Beyond Empiricism: Why Statistics Cannot Capture Economic Reality. The modern obsession with statistical analysis in economics represents a fundamental methodological error that has crippled genuine understanding for generations. American universities now teach students to believe that economics is about correlations, regressions, and probability distributions, when in reality, these tools are completely inappropriate for studying purposeful human action. The critical flaw in empirical methodology lies in its assumption that economic phenomena can be studied like natural phenomena, through observation, measurement, and testing. But human beings are not atoms or molecules responding mechanically to external stimuli. We are conscious actors who learn, adapt, and change our behavior based on our understanding of circumstances. Consider the impossibility of conducting controlled experiments in economics. When the Federal Reserve changes interest rates, countless variables change simultaneously: business expectations, consumer confidence, international conditions, regulatory environment, and technological developments. Unlike a laboratory where variables can be isolated, economic reality involves the complex interaction of millions of individual decisions, each influenced by subjective factors that cannot be quantified. More fundamentally, statistical methods assume that past patterns will continue into the future, that human behavior follows stable, measurable relationships. But purposeful action means that individuals constantly reevaluate their circumstances and adjust their behavior accordingly. Yesterday's correlation may disappear tomorrow when people learn new information or develop different preferences. This is why Keynesian economics fails so spectacularly in practice. Keynesians believe they can manipulate aggregate statistics, consumption, investment, government spending, to produce desired outcomes. They treat these aggregates as if they were mechanical relationships, ignoring that each represents the sum of countless individual decisions made by people pursuing their own goals under their own understanding of their circumstances. The most devastating example is how economists try to measure inflation through price indices. They imagine that comparing a basket of goods today with the same basket last year reveals something meaningful about monetary policy. But prices are expressions of individual value judgments at specific moments in time. When the government expands the money supply, the new money doesn't affect all prices simultaneously or proportionally. It flows through the economy based on who receives it first and how they choose to spend it. Praxeology reveals why empirical economics consistently fails. It attempts to study teleological phenomena, purposeful, goal-directed action, using methods designed for mechanical, deterministic systems. This category error dooms any attempt to create genuine predictive models of human behavior. We can understand the logical structure of action and its inevitable consequences, but we cannot predict the specific content of future human choices, because those choices depend on knowledge and preferences that don't yet exist. Chapter 3: The Logic of Choice: How Individual Decisions Create Economic Order. Every economic phenomenon ultimately traces back to individual human choices made under conditions of scarcity. This isn't a simplification for analytical convenience, it's the logical reality that makes economic science possible. When we understand how individuals choose between alternatives, we can deduce the laws that govern all complex economic arrangements. The starting point is recognizing that all action involves choice between alternatives. When I choose to write these words, I'm simultaneously choosing not to read, not to walk, not to rest. Every action involves sacrificing the next best alternative, what economists call opportunity cost. This isn't merely an interesting concept, it's a logical necessity that flows from the nature of action itself. Take a moment to observe your own decision-making process today. Notice how you constantly evaluate options based on your subjective sense of their importance to you right now. When you decided to watch this video instead of checking social media, you demonstrated the fundamental principle of subjective value, that the worth of any good or service depends entirely on how much an individual values it at the moment of choice. This subjectivity of value revolutionizes our understanding of economic processes. Classical economists believed that goods had objective values determined by labor costs or material properties. But praxeology reveals that value exists only in the mind of the individual chooser. A glass of water has enormous value to someone dying of thirst, but little value to someone who just drank their fill. The same physical object, completely different valuations. From this foundation, we can deduce the law of marginal utility, that additional units of any good become progressively less valuable to an individual. Your first slice of pizza satisfies your strongest desire for pizza, the second slice satisfies a less urgent desire, the 10th slice might actually diminish your satisfaction. This logical pattern explains why demand curves slope downward without requiring any statistical analysis. The miracle emerges when millions of these individual choices interact through the market process. Each person, pursuing their own goals with their own limited knowledge, contributes to creating a spontaneous order that coordinates human activity more effectively than any central planner could design. Prices emerge from the interaction of subjective valuations, conveying information about relative scarcity and guiding resources toward their most valued uses. Consider how a simple price change ripples through the economy. When lumber prices rise, furniture makers seek alternatives, construction projects get delayed, forestry operations expand, and consumers reconsider renovation plans. No central authority coordinated these adjustments, they emerged automatically from individual responses to changed circumstances. This spontaneous coordination explains why free markets consistently outperform planned economies. Central planners cannot access the dispersed knowledge embedded in individual preferences and circumstances. They cannot calculate the opportunity costs of alternative resource uses because they lack access to the subjective valuations that give those calculations meaning. American prosperity emerged from allowing this spontaneous order to operate with minimal interference. Every government intervention disrupts this delicate coordination process, replacing the wisdom of millions of individual choosers with the necessarily limited knowledge of political officials. Chapter 4: The Impossibility of Economic Calculation Under Socialism. The most devastating critique of socialist economics isn't political or moral, it's logical. Socialism is impossible because it destroys the information system that makes rational economic calculation possible. Without private property and means of production, there can be no genuine prices for capital goods, and without genuine prices, rational allocation of resources becomes logically impossible. This isn't a matter of socialist planners being less intelligent or motivated than capitalist entrepreneurs. Even if we populated socialist planning boards with the wisest, most benevolent individuals imaginable, they would face an insurmountable logical problem. They cannot know what resources are worth in alternative uses because they've eliminated the market process that generates this information. Prices in a free market aren't arbitrary numbers, they're expressions of the relative urgency of different human wants as revealed through voluntary exchange. When consumers bid up the price of steel, they're telling producers that steel is more urgently needed in consumer goods than in other potential uses. When entrepreneurs bid up the price of skilled labor, they're indicating which production processes can generate the most consumer satisfaction per worker employed. Socialist planners cannot access this information because they've prohibited the voluntary exchanges that create it. They might know the physical properties of steel, its tensile strength, chemical composition, melting point, but they cannot know its economic significance, whether steel is more urgently needed for automobiles, construction, or machinery, because they've eliminated the pricing process that reveals these relative valuations. The Soviet Union's economic failures perfectly illustrated this logical impossibility. Despite vast natural resources, educated populations, and decades of experience, socialist economies consistently produced chronic shortages, massive waste, and technological stagnation. Soviet planners could copy Western prices to approximate market valuations, but this merely demonstrated their dependence on capitalist countries for the very information they claimed to make unnecessary. Modern Americans often assume that computer technology might overcome the calculation problem that plagued earlier socialist experiments. But computational power cannot solve a logical impossibility. Computers can process information faster, but they cannot create information that doesn't exist. The subjective valuations that give prices their economic meaning exist only in the minds of individual market participants making real choices with their own property. Contemporary proposals for market socialism or democratic socialism don't escape this logical trap, they simply conceal it behind more sophisticated rhetoric. Any system that prevents individuals from freely buying and selling productive resources eliminates the price formation process that makes economic calculation possible. The degree of central planning determines the degree of economic irrationality, but the logical problem remains absolute. This isn't an argument about efficiency or fairness, it's a demonstration of logical impossibility. Socialism cannot work because it eliminates the very mechanism that makes rational resource allocation possible in a complex economy. Without genuine prices based on voluntary exchange, economic calculation becomes as impossible as mathematics without numbers. American policymakers who push for increased government control over healthcare, education, energy, and finance are gradually destroying the calculation mechanisms that made American prosperity possible. Each intervention reduces the scope of voluntary exchange and thereby reduces the quality of economic information available to guide resource allocation. Chapter 5: Money, Credit, and the Business Cycle: How Government Creates the Crises It Claims to Solve. The recurring pattern of economic booms and busts that plague America isn't a mysterious feature of capitalism, it's the predictable result of government interference with the natural market process of money and credit. Understanding this mechanism requires grasping how genuine interest rates coordinate production across time, and how artificial credit expansion destroys this coordination. In a free market, interest rates perform the crucial function of coordinating present consumption with future production. When individuals save more, they're expressing a preference for future goods over present consumption. Lower interest rates signal entrepreneurs that consumers are willing to wait longer for finished products, making longer-term production processes profitable. Higher interest rates indicate greater urgency for immediate consumption, favoring shorter production periods. Observe this principle in your daily life. When you save money instead of spending it immediately, you're increasing the pool of funds available for investment, naturally pushing interest rates lower. When you withdraw savings to purchase consumer goods, you're reducing available investment funds, naturally pushing rates higher. This automatic mechanism ensures that production timelines align with consumer preferences about present versus future consumption. The Federal Reserve destroys this natural coordination by artificially manipulating interest rates through credit expansion. When the Fed creates new money and injects it into the banking system, it drives interest rates below their natural market level. This false signal misleads entrepreneurs into believing that consumers have increased their saving when they actually haven't changed their time preferences at all. Entrepreneurs, responding rationally to these false price signals, begin longer-term investment projects that appear profitable at the artificially low interest rates. Construction companies start more ambitious building projects, manufacturers invest in expanded capacity, and technology firms pursue longer development timelines. The economy appears to boom as employment and investment increase. But this boom is built on a logical contradiction. The same consumers who haven't actually increased their saving continue demanding present consumption at previous levels. As the longer production processes begin generating income for workers and suppliers, this additional purchasing power competes with unchanged consumer demand for current goods. Prices begin rising, forcing the Fed to choose between allowing inflation to accelerate or raising interest rates back toward market levels. When the Fed inevitably restricts credit to combat inflation, the artificial boom collapses. Projects that appeared profitable at artificially low interest rates become unsustainable at market rates. The economy experiences what politicians call recession, but which is actually the necessary process of liquidating investments that never corresponded to genuine consumer preferences. American economic history perfectly illustrates this pattern. The Federal Reserve's easy credit policies in the 1920s generated the unsustainable boom that collapsed in 1929. Similar credit expansions preceded the recessions of 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and 2020s. Each time, politicians and economists blamed market failure and prescribed more government intervention, when the real problem was previous government intervention disrupting natural market processes. The most tragic aspect is how this cycle impoverishes ordinary Americans while enriching those closest to the source of new money creation. When the Fed creates new money, banks and government contractors receive it first, before prices have adjusted upward. By the time newly created money reaches workers and savers, inflation has already eroded their purchasing power. This systematic redistribution from productive citizens to politically connected institutions represents one of the most regressive taxes imaginable. Chapter 6: Entrepreneurship and the Discovery Process: How Markets Generate Progress. The dynamic force that drives economic progress isn't technology or natural resources, it's entrepreneurial discovery of better ways to satisfy human wants. Entrepreneurship represents the creative response to uncertainty, the process by which individuals identify opportunities to create value by rearranging resources in more productive combinations. This process is both the source of economic progress and the reason why free markets consistently outperform planned systems. Most people misunderstand entrepreneurship as simply starting a business or inventing new products. But the entrepreneurial function is much more fundamental. It's the human capacity to notice discrepancies between current conditions and potential improvements, then act to exploit these opportunities. Every time someone recognizes that consumers would value a particular good or service more than the resources required to produce it, they're performing the entrepreneurial function. Consider how entrepreneurs discover profitable opportunities. They don't possess crystal balls or perfect information about the future. They make educated guesses based on their understanding of consumer preferences and production possibilities. When an entrepreneur succeeds in creating value, profits reward their accurate judgment about what consumers want. When they fail to create value, losses punish their incorrect assessment and redirect resources toward more valuable uses. This profit and loss mechanism performs the crucial function of discovery and correction that no central planning system can replicate. Profits signal that entrepreneurs have successfully identified consumer preferences and organized production efficiently. Losses signal that resources are being wasted and need to be redirected. Both signals are essential for economic progress. Profits encourage more of what works, while losses eliminate what doesn't work. The competitive market process ensures that successful innovations spread throughout the economy while failures get eliminated quickly. When one entrepreneur discovers a better production method, competitors must either adopt similar improvements or lose market share to more efficient rivals. This competitive pressure drives continuous improvement and ensures that the benefits of entrepreneurial discovery get passed on to consumers through better products and lower prices. American economic history demonstrates the power of entrepreneurial discovery when allowed to operate freely. The entrepreneurs who created the automobile industry, computer technology, modern telecommunications, and countless other innovations didn't receive government grants or follow central plans. They risked their own resources based on their judgment about what consumers might value. Their successes transformed American life and created prosperity that previous generations could never have imagined. Government intervention systematically undermines this discovery process in multiple ways. Regulations create barriers that prevent entrepreneurs from testing new ideas. Subsidies redirect resources toward politically favored projects regardless of their economic merit. Bailouts prevent the loss mechanism from eliminating failed approaches. Trade restrictions limit the scope of entrepreneurial experimentation. Most destructively, inflation distorts the profit and loss signals that guide entrepreneurial discovery. When the Federal Reserve creates artificial booms through credit expansion, entrepreneurs receive false signals about consumer preferences and investment opportunities. Projects that appear profitable during the artificial boom turn out to be wastes of resources when the boom collapses. This systematic distortion of market signals impedes genuine entrepreneurial discovery and redirects creative energy toward activities that don't actually create value. The result is slower economic progress, reduced innovation, and lower living standards than would emerge from allowing entrepreneurial discovery to operate without government interference. Every regulation that prevents someone from testing a new business model, every subsidy that props up an inefficient industry, every bailout that prevents creative destruction represents a lost opportunity for entrepreneurial discovery to improve human welfare. Chapter 7: The Path Forward: Restoring Economic Science and American Prosperity. The restoration of American prosperity requires abandoning the failed methods that have dominated economic policy for the past century and returning to the sound principles that made America prosperous in the first place. This isn't simply a matter of changing policies, it requires a fundamental transformation in how Americans think about economics, moving from the superstitions of interventionism to the scientific foundation of praxeology. The first step is educational. Americans must understand that economics is a logical science based on the universal laws of human action, not a collection of political opinions about what government should do. When citizens grasp that inflation is theft, that minimum wage laws create unemployment, that regulations protect established businesses from competition, and that government spending crowds out private investment, they become immune to the sophistries that justify increased intervention. This educational foundation must emphasize the logical necessity of economic laws rather than their empirical consequences. While it's useful to point out that socialist countries are poorer than capitalist countries, or that heavily regulated industries stagnate while competitive industries innovate, these historical examples don't constitute proof of economic principles. The real proof lies in demonstrating the logical impossibility of alternatives to free market coordination. Consider how to approach someone who argues for price controls to fight inflation. Instead of citing historical examples of price control failures, show them the logical contradiction in the policy itself. Price controls prevent prices from adjusting to clear markets, creating shortages that require either rationing or black markets. The attempt to stop inflation through price controls necessarily creates new problems that are worse than the original inflation. This logical demonstration is more persuasive than any historical example because it shows why price controls must fail regardless of circumstances. The practical implementation of sound economic principles requires systematic deregulation, monetary reform, and fiscal restraint. But these policy changes will remain impossible until Americans understand why they're necessary. Politicians follow public opinion, and public opinion currently supports interventionist policies because people don't understand the logical impossibility of making them work. The technology exists today to spread genuine economic education more effectively than ever before. The same digital platforms that allow government propaganda to reach millions can also transmit sound economic principles to anyone willing to think logically about human action. Every person who understands praxeology becomes a center of education for family, friends, and colleagues. American institutions retain enough flexibility to implement genuine economic reforms if the political will exists. Unlike countries with parliamentary systems that require coalition building, American federalism allows individual states to experiment with sound policies even when federal policy remains misguided. States that reduce regulations, eliminate income taxes, and protect property rights will demonstrate the practical benefits of economic freedom, creating pressure for other states to follow their example. The ultimate goal isn't just policy reform but intellectual transformation. America needs a generation of citizens who understand that prosperity comes from voluntary cooperation, not government control, that innovation comes from entrepreneurial discovery, not bureaucratic planning, that monetary stability comes from sound money, not central bank manipulation. When this understanding becomes widespread, Sound policies will follow naturally because people will demand them. The choice facing America is fundamental: continue down the path of increasing government control until prosperity disappears entirely, or return to the economic principles that created American prosperity in the first place. The logic of human action provides clear guidance for this choice, but Americans must choose to follow logic rather than political emotion. Conclusion. The science of human action offers Americans both a diagnosis of our current economic problems and a clear path toward renewed prosperity. Every crisis plaguing America today, inflation, unemployment, stagnation, inequality, stems from government interference with the natural market processes that coordinate human cooperation. The solution isn't more sophisticated intervention but systematic removal of the interventions that created these problems. When Americans understand that economics is logical science, not political opinion, they become immune to the sophistries that justify expanded government control. The principles of praxeology provide the intellectual foundation for defending economic freedom against all forms of collectivist error. Truth eventually prevails over error, but only when enough people understand and defend correct principles. Your role in this process matters more than you might imagine. Every person who grasps the logic of human action becomes a center of education for others, spreading the understanding that makes genuine reform possible. The future of American prosperity depends on our commitment to economic truth over political convenience.